Hello, friends. Welcome back to Colliding Worldviews. Great to have you with me here once again. If you did not see the last episode with my guest, her name is Elrita Dodds. You can find her website at elritadodds.com. You can check out all the books that she's written. Very timely subjects. Doesn't matter if you're talking about the LGBTQ issues that come up today, about slavery that is brought up all the time, especially when people try to justify using the Bible to promote or to justify the history of slavery, which of course is not biblical. We talked about that in the last episode. And of course, the Nation of Islam, which actually is a cult of Islam, but yet they claim to be the true Muslims, and yet Orthodox Islam would not line up with it. And we asked the question in the last episode, is Islam the true religion of the black man? No, it's not. It doesn't matter if you want to talk about Orthodox Islam, because of the fact that the Islamic slave trade had African Americans as slaves, and that was actually bigger than the transatlantic slave trade that you learn about in public schools. Muhammad owned slaves. We find in the Hadith that Muhammad seemed like a white man, not a black man. So a big no for the question, is Islam the true religion of the black man? But before we ask the question in this episode, is Christianity the white man's religion, and answer that question, I want to introduce my guest who's back here once again, and this is Elrita Dodds. Elrita, thank you for being here once again on Colliding Worldviews.
Oh, thank you so very much, Tony. I really appreciate you having me on the show. It really do. It's a blessing.
And I want to encourage people again to see the last episode if they did not see it. Is Islam the true religion of the black man? No, it's not, but you'll find out why when you watch that. And in this episode, is Christianity the white man's religion? Why is that claim even made, Elrita?
Well, it goes back actually to the Nation of Islam and the influences that particular theological teaching has had within the black community. Like I said in the previous show, Elijah Muhammad taught that the Christianity is the black slave-making religion, and all of them, Farrakhan, Elijah Muhammad, Noble Ali, all of them basically said that it is a white man's religion. And then, of course, you have the white slave masters themselves saying that blacks were cursed to be slaves. And so that fed into the mythology and the erroneous teaching that, that it's a white man's religion. And then, of course, you had pictures of Jesus being white and so forth. So it culminated into a lot of black people in America feeling that, okay, this is a white man's religion. This is not my religion. My religion is something else. My religion is Islam or what have you.
And Elrita, again, I want to encourage people to get your book. This is a book that you wrote in 1997, 4 years before 9/11. The Trouble with Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, another message to the black man in America. In this, you not only critique Louis Farrakhan's speeches, the most popular speeches that he's given, but also, too, you say in the beginning of it, the purpose of this book is to, number one, challenge the modern-day fallacy that Christianity and Islam are compatible. They are not. Two, reveal in detail the true agenda of Farrakhan. And three, expose Farrakhan for who he really is, an antichrist and a false prophet steered by racist views. Now, if anyone has not read your book, but they have watched the news and they see the different news stories about Farrakhan, where he obviously not only hates Jews and doesn't like whites, is always pointing to the black man as superior. And in the last episode, we talked about the origin of the Nation of Islam and W.D. Fard, Elijah Muhammad. We brought Malcolm X into the equation and what he had to do with that, even though he moved away from the NOI because he leaned more towards Orthodox Islam. We see that Louis Farrakhan, he was actually angered by W.D. Muhammad stray from NOI beliefs, he created a splinter group, also known as the NOI, and that is devoted to Black nationalist theology. Now, it makes sense that they would make this claim that Christianity is the white man's religion. We don't like white men. We don't like Christianity. The black man is superior. You talked about blue-eyed devils in the last episode. Let's get into Farrakhan and this claim that Christianity is the white man's religion. Let's go and hit number 2 of the purpose of your book and the true agenda of Farrakhan and how white men and Christianity fall into that.
Well, yes, I think basically the true agenda of Farrakhan really is Black nationalism, separation of the races. That really hasn't gone too well. But also to encourage people to come into the nation of Islam. And there are many people who are Christians in America, many Black people. And basically, there are a lot of Black Christians who embrace the Nation of Islam and embrace Farrakhan, despite the fact of what he teaches theologically, because of what they feel is the Black unity message. And I said, well, the real purpose is to ingratiate people into the Nation of Islam. And so that's what I definitely think is purpose. So in order to do that, you have to really keep it going as far as saying that, Islam is really the religion of the Black man, and Christianity is really a Black slave-making religion, and Christianity in the Bible is really at fault for what happened during the antebellum years here in America. But that's really simply not the case. It's not the case biblically. The Bible is not the white man's religion. The Bible, Christianity is not the white man's religion. Christianity is a religion for everyone. And it's interesting because people will say that. They'll say, well, it's a white man's religion. And I'll say, well, and it's a westernized religion and all this. And I'll be quick to point out, well, Jesus was born, in the Middle East, basically. He was born in Bethlehem, Israel, not Bethlehem, New York. And, that's one of the things. He was Jewish. He's a Jew. And I think it's ironic. You've got Black people on the other side of things. You have white people saying he was white and Black people saying he was Black. And then you have much of the Orthodox Jews that don't accept him as the Messiah. So it's just, ironic events and occurrences here. But basically to say it's a white man's religion is very erroneous. It's a religion for everyone. John 3:16 says, that God gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever will believe in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Whosoever is whosoever. God so loved the world, the whole world, not just white people. Biblically, there's just so many scriptures that say the opposite, that say that Christianity is for everyone and not just for a particular race of people.
Well, Rita, we read in 1 John chapter 2, we read that about who the Antichrist is. And it says here too, 1 John 2:22, who is the liar but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, he who denies the Father and the Son. Now, not only does Orthodox Islam deny the Father and the Son, and of course makes sense that you have Antichrist there, but in your book, just in the intro, you mentioned that third point of expose Farrakhan for who he really is, an Antichrist and a false prophet steered by racist views. Please give our audience a summary of why you make that statement in light of 1 John, but just from what you've seen and heard from Farrakhan himself in his famous speeches, which you talk about in your book, as well as more recent statements that he's made as well.
Yes, well, Farrakhan, basically, when he opens up in his speeches, and we see that in all of his speeches, he celebrates Wallace Farr, as the great Mahdi. But, that's what he says. And that says that, basically, that's basically saying he's God in the flesh. He's the Messiah. And then he celebrates, he mentions Elijah Muhammad. Now, he'll mention Jesus Christ along the line somewhere in his speech. But he always starts off worshiping Wallace Fard and Elijah Muhammad as God in the flesh and as the Messiah. And so, of course, biblically, if you say that anyone aside from Jesus Christ is the Messiah, aside from Jesus Christ as Lord, then you are a false prophet. Anybody is. Farrakhan, anybody from any religion. And so he does that. And when I say steered by racist views, well, he embraced the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, who did have racist views. They felt that, white people were created by a scientist named Yakub 66 trillion years ago, and that they were a mutant race of people. This is in Elijah Muhammad's Message to the Black Man that he published in 1965, which was very popular in the Black community, which is why the subtitle of my book was titled Another Message to the Black Man in America. So, and then just recently in 2018, every year the Nation of Islam puts on what they call a Savior's Day event. And this is a huge event. It's done in Detroit, it's done in Chicago. Well, last year, sometimes I'll look at it, and last year I watched it because they always put it on, YouTube and make it available. Last year, Farrakhan was introduced in a way that was actually astounding, as if he were God. And then Farrakhan, when he got to the podium, he actually said that he is a young God. So he said he's God. And then one of the persons there, used to be real popular singer, Stephanie Mills, bowed down to him, kneeled down to him, and worshiped him as God during that time. Anybody can pull up the video. It's on YouTube. It's the Savior's Day 2018, where he said this kind of thing. That is clearly, the Bible speaks against this, and Jesus warned us about this, saying that anyone that says that, Jesus Christ did not come in the flesh, that he is not God in the flesh, is an antichrist. It does not accept him. All right. So that's what I mean by that. When I wrote the book for Christians to try to let them know this is what Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, this is what they're teaching. Beware. Because he was being invited to churches to speak in churches all over the country, and he still is. And so the church has to know, when you do this, you're letting someone in who's going to, the first thing he's going to do is give praise to Fard Muhammad, Wallace Fard, and Elijah Muhammad as God in the flesh and as Messiah. We couldn't go into the Nation of Islam, into their temple, and do that and preach Jesus. We couldn't go into an Orthodox mosque and preach Jesus. But yet the church, especially the Black church, will invite him in, and it's all under Black unity. The issues and the things that have pained our society. But we have to be very careful. So yes, that's why I say those things in the book.
And again, I really encourage people to get the book because, Rita, you do a great job critiquing Farrakhan's most famous speeches. I mean, you give a paragraph of what he said, you'll break it down, you'll explain what he means by that. You talk about how he caters to different audiences. If he's speaking to a group of African Americans, he will say different things than if he's speaking in a church where maybe there's more white people there, or if he's speaking in front of Christians. You break down all this stuff. And again, from the Million Man March speech and the other ones as well, folks, you need to get this book. Read it, especially if you know anyone who's part of the Nation of Islam, or if you just know that there are NOI people in your area where you are. They're on the streets, much like the Black Hebrew Israelites, who we touched on just briefly in the first episode. But whereas the Nation of Islam, of course, is focused on Islam, even though it is a cult splinter group of Islam, the Black Hebrew Israelites, of course, are focused more on Judaism and Jews. Where, of course, the interesting fact is that they are both focused on highly on race, but of course have that different view. Where NOI, Farrakhan's always giving very anti-Semitic statements for his hatred of Jews, and of course is in support of Iran and other countries and Orthodox Islam, which also hates Jews. The origin of Islamic Jew hatred is with Muhammad himself, but this Muhammad is not seen as the last prophet as it is in Orthodox Islam. Again, the Nation of Islam, don't let that fool you. It is actually a cult of Orthodox Islam. Not that Orthodox Islam is true either. They're both false, of course. But El Rita explains why in her book. She goes into the Hadith and the Quran. In the last episode, we talked about, is Islam the true religion of the black man? No, it doesn't matter if you're talking about NOI or Orthodox Islam, which is much bigger, of course. But is Christianity the white man's religion? No, it is not. Christianity is the religion that corresponds to reality, the Judeo-Christian worldview. The message to blacks, to whites, to Arabs, to Asians, etc., is the same. You are a sinner in need of a savior, and Jesus Christ is that savior. He wasn't white. He wasn't black. He was from the Middle East. He was a Jew, and he was the eternal Son of God in human flesh. He lived a perfect, sinless life. He died on the cross. He rose from the dead in glory 3 days later, and all people, black, white, Asian, Arab, etc., who repents and puts their trust in him, can have reconciliation to the Father and have the gift of everlasting life. Now, who is the Antichrist? He who denies the Father and denies the Son, which both NOI and Orthodox Islam does. Rita, if someone comes up to you and says, hey, you shouldn't be a Christian. Christianity is a white man's religion, but they haven't done their homework. They simply just repeat that because it's something that they've heard from somebody else. What would your few-minute response be to the person who makes that claim?
Well, I would take them to a few places in the Bible, and I would take them to places that talks about favoritism being a sin. Basically, that we see that in Leviticus. We see it in Proverbs that the Lord tests a double standard. We see in Timothy 5, chapter 5, and it says here, I charge you in the sight of God and of Jesus Christ and elect angels to keep these instructions and do without partiality and do nothing out of favoritism. Favoritism is a sin, and racism is a type of favoritism. And so I would talk about that. And then I would take them also to, as far as human equality, Acts 17, verses 24 and 26, which says, God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by hand. He is not served by human hands, as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. From one man, says, from one man, verse 26, he made every nation of men that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. And so we all come from Adam. So there really is no such thing as race. If we go back far enough, then we all have the same great, you know, I mean, if we really go back far enough, we all come for that. Racism is a human ploy, I believe, that is inspired by demonic forces, actually. If we look at what Genesis says in verse 1, God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. There's no race in that, all right? And we are all created in the image of God. And it talks about that there, in Corinthians, that there are different kinds of flesh, all right? Kind of the flesh of fish and the flesh of mammals and the flesh of animals and the flesh of human beings. There's no one, we think of, you know, the old saying, well, stick with your own kind. All right. Well, biblically, there's only one kind of flesh when we're talking about human beings. There's not the black kind and the white kind and the Asian kind and the Japanese. You know, there is just one kind of flesh, and that's the human kind. So we are one species. All of us are in the species of human beings. And so these are many of the things that I would say. I would really go into favoritism not being a sin. I would show them the scriptures that talk about that God shows no partiality. that God has created everybody in his own image. I talked about John 3:16 that says God so loved the world. I would go into Romans 10:9 that says if you confess Jesus as Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, ye shall be saved. There's no race in that. I would have to also go into a lot of these scriptures that talk about slavery because, a lot of black people feel that, well, that's why it's the white man's religion. So I debunk the black curse, and I get into that. And then I'd show them scriptures where, in 1 Timothy, it says slave trading is a sin. It's compared with murder. Slave trading in the sense that kidnapping a man and selling him is a sin just as much as murder is. I show them those scriptures, and I have done that, and people are amazed that the scriptures are there. There's scriptures in the Old Testament that said, if a slave takes refuge with you, don't send him back to his master. Put him up and treat him well. Keep reading in Ephesians 6. It also says that masters are not supposed to threaten their slaves and treat them as if how Jesus would treat people. Whoa. Well, a lot of people don't even know that that's in there. So these are many of the things that I would talk about and that I have talked about. And people have been surprised that these things are in there because all they heard all their life was it's just a black slave-making religion, and the Bible curses blacks to be slaves. It's just for the white man. But no, the Bible is for everyone, and here are the scriptures. So I would really get into those particular scriptures.
This is a topic that's brought up all the time when we are talking about truth. Because if Christianity is true, well, then anything that opposes that is automatically false. And this doesn't matter if you're talking about Orthodox Islam, the Nation of Islam, if you're talking about Mormonism, which, by the way, it wasn't until 1978 that African Americans were even allowed to be part of the priesthood. Mormonism had an issue with African Americans and put them on a lower level than white people. And Mormonism is a complete lie as well. But yet that lie had a negative view on African Americans, again, based on a person's skin color, the mark of Cain. There are other groups who are racist. We have the Ku Klux Klan, who you even mentioned in your book briefly as well. This issue about a person's skin color needs to be dealt with once and for all. We're human beings. You said we are the same kind. We're made in the image of God. It doesn't matter how much melanin you have in your skin. If your complexion is lighter or darker than someone else, the question is, are you human? If so, Jesus Christ died for you. And again, he wasn't white. He wasn't black. I have a presentation I created about this called Fighting Jesus, how the cults distort the gospel of Christ. And that I talk about Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Islam. And of course, even if you're not even talking about religion, there's still racist people out there. And that's why everybody needs the gospel. It doesn't matter if they're non-religious, if they are religious but happen to follow one of the many lies that are out there. Again, anything that contradicts Christianity is a lie. Orthodox Islam, Nation of Islam, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Hinduism, Buddhism, Shintoism, every other worldview out there is incorrect, because they have contradictory views of who Jesus Christ is. Orthodox Islam, Nation of Islam, they don't have the right God. They don't have the right Jesus. But guess what? If you don't ever ask questions, if you just hear God, you hear Jesus, and you think, oh, okay, well, we pretty much believe the same thing. That is not the case in any sense whatsoever. You have to ask them, who is God? Because you're going to hear a different answer if you're talking with an NOI versus if you're talking with an Orthodox Muslim. If you ask who is Jesus, you're going to hear a different answer. Now, Louis Farrakhan hates Jews. He hates white people. He has a twisted view not only of reality and truth, but of course of Orthodox Islam as well, because NOI, or the Nation of Islam, doesn't line up with Orthodox Islam. Again, Elrita's book that we're talking about today is a book that you need to pick up. And pick up her other books too. Get the book on Is God a Chauvinist? The Right to be Christian in a Gay Rights America, Racism, the Bible, and the American Dream, what the Bible really says about slavery. The slavery topic and the Farrakhan, the Nation of Islam, are two topics you definitely need to study and get these books, because these are brought up all the time. If you're just talking with your average college student, what are the topics that people bring up the most? Especially when you're talking about apologists who are out there reaching the lost, sharing the gospel. What type of rebuttals do they get when it comes to the Bible? Oh, it condones slavery. It does not, and Alrita talks about that. What about the whole topic of racism and slavery? That needs to be dealt with as well. If you get all of Alrita's books, including the one that we're talking about today, The Trouble with Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, Another Message to the Black Man in America, you're going to be better equipped to reach people around you. Now, the apologetics don't save anyone. The gospel is the power of God into salvation. However, we can use apologetics to destroy the intellectual walls and barriers that people have and clear the path to share the gospel clearly and effectively. Apologetics don't save anyone, but God can use apologetics to draw someone to salvation and help clear those obstacles to make the gospel make sense. Alrita, your website is elritadodds.com. You've written a number of books we want people to pick up. Please give a 30-second closing statement to our audience.
Well, want to say that it's important to be able to know and study to show thyself approved so that you can defend the faith. In 1 Peter, it says we should know the reason why we believe what we believe as Christians. And so most of my books are written to Christians, so if they have any concerns or problems or questions, they can study these things and be able to better defend the faith. And also, if they need this information themselves. Also, I just want to say that the books that are The Trouble with Farrakhan, The Nation of Islam, the Slavery book, and Racism in the Bible and the American Dream, they are available online in various places. They're out of print as far as the hard copies, but you can still get them online in various places. The one that I just recently published, Right to be Christian and the Gay Rights of America, that's nationally distributed, and you can get it at bookstores and everywhere and online as well. But I just wanted to make that clear. I didn't want to give you kind of impression. But yes, you can get them online. You can get all the books online. But one that's still in print is my latest one, and another one that doesn't have to do with it has to do with Christians and dating. It doesn't have to do with apologetics. All the other apologetic books, except for the latest one, they're online. But they're out of print, but they're still online, available at Amazon and other places. So I just wanted to say that.
Alrita, you've been a blessing. Thank you so much for being on Colliding Worldviews.
Thank you so very much for having me on. You've been a blessing, and I can't tell you how very much I'm just so grateful. Thank you so very much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Friends, pick up her books. Again, go to elritadodds.com. Get all of her books. Get studied up on this, and you'll be able to better defend the Christian faith and deal with the rebuttals and refutations that you hear. And again, most importantly, get the gospel out to all people. God bless you. We'll see you next time on Colliding Worldviews.